Breaking today is the sensational claim that Keir Starmer spent Christmas Eve in 2020, the height of the COVID pandemic, getting vocal lessons from acting coach Leonie Mellinger at Labour's headquarters in central London.
Keir Starmer betrayed Britain again by proving that Labour and his cronies work on a two-tier system.
Shouted questions about his apparent breach of lockdown rules, the Prime Minister managed to mutter, "Of course not," adding, "All rules were followed."
Starmer's been caught red-handed and he's trying to escape humiliation by gaslighting the public.
Right, I think that what we're seeing from him is that kind of lawyer vibe of like, oh, well, I've got an excuse for that. Oh, well, I can get out of that. And it's just this growing feeling of, you just think you're in your own lane, don't you? That you are above everyone else.
Two-tier Keir thinks that the rules don't apply to him, but the public won't let him get away.
Prime Minister has been accused of breaking the strictest lockdown rules when he met with his personal voice coach during the Christmas lockdown of December 2020. Incidentally revealed in a new book called Get In, A History of the Labour Party under Sir Keir, the Labour leader was visited by his voice coach and old family friend Leonie Mellinger to help him communicate with the public, including a controversial visit during lockdown's strictest period in London.
Shady Starmer has been exposed to be a complete hypocrite and the public is left furious.
At a NATO press conference this week, Keir Starmer somehow had time for only 2 questions from the press before dashing off. As journalists shouted questions about his apparent breach of lockdown rules, the Prime Minister managed to mutter, "Of course not," adding, "All rules were followed," only adding that as he ran from the room.
By the front. Thank you very much.
All right, that's all we have time for. Thank you.
Of course not.
Was your voice coach definitely working?
Now that the truth is out, Starmer's running away like a coward, but he won't escape the backlash.
Leonie Mellinger posted a selfie visiting Keir Starmer in London on the 24th of December 2020. This when the strictest lockdown rules were in place in the capital. Mellinger claims that her 60-mile journey to meet Starmer was exempt, as she qualified for so-called key worker status. But Starmer's own forensic team have failed to produce a single document proving this to be the case.
Starmer and his cronies are not only doing whatever they want, they're shamelessly proud of their dishonesty.
And the truth here matters for Starmer. During a previous police investigation, he said that were he found to have broken any COVID rules, he would resign. Now, to understand the potency of this latest scandal, we've got to put it in context. Let's think back to the height of Boris Johnson's Partygate, when in April 2022, Keir Starmer addressed the scandal in Parliament.
Labour's panicking as Starmer could be forced out of the office because of his own arrogant words.
Let's remind ourselves of Starmer's comments performance that April.
And we understand that the rules apply to all of us. This morning, I spoke to John Robinson, a constituent of the member for Lichfield. I want to tell you his story. When his wife died of COVID, John and his family obeyed the Prime Minister's rules. He didn't see her in hospital. He didn't hold her hand as she died.
Two-tier Keir was bashing Boris Johnson while his own actions were disgustingly much worse.
If the Prime Minister had any respect for John, and the millions like him who sacrificed everything to follow the rules, he'd resign. But he won't, because he doesn't respect John. He doesn't respect the sacrifice of the British public. He is a man without shame.
Quite the performance.
Will Starmer show some integrity and resign now, or will he try to weasel his way out of this scandal?
Yes, let's return to December 2020, the 24th, when Keir Starmer's voice coach travelled 60 miles to London to give him acting lessons. London was in the midst of lockdown's strictest tier at the time. There were no exemptions for non-key workers. The country was hurtling towards 1,000 COVID deaths a day. Keir Starmer himself called it an emergency.
The news over the last 24 hours has been deeply disturbing. The number of coronavirus cases has nearly doubled in the last week.
Starmer's behaviour is nothing short of tone deaf and a complete betrayal of public safety in Britain.
The leader of the opposition was urging people to follow the rules. The strict rules. He highlighted the emergency the country faced. Keir Starmer would later opine before the House of Commons how people like John Robinson were prevented from even holding the hand of their dying relatives. Yet now we know Keir Starmer met up with his voice coach in person during the strictest tier of lockdown.
The Labour Party has proved time and time again that they don't have a shred of integrity or honesty within them. Starmer's the peak example of this appalling behaviour, as he had the audacity to shamelessly use people's tragic stories as emotional rhetoric just to bash Boris Johnson. Meanwhile, he was doing the exact same thing during that entire time. In fact, people are arguing that what Starmer did was significantly worse, as not only did he break the rules, he completely bended them for his cronies. Ask yourself, how important was this voice coaching that he had to ensure special treatment while the entire nation was forced to follow the rules? Starmer's been exposed in quite a few scandals by now, and his career isn't going to last much longer at this rate.
Once you've decreed that Boris Johnson has broken the rules by merely meeting his colleagues in the cabinet room with that grim pint of orange juice at the point of lockdown easing, once that's the bar for breaking the rules, well, Keir Starmer's own record must be cleaner than clean. It seems that the Prime Minister has questions to answer.
At the end of the day, Starmer has the right to criticise as many people as they want. The only problem the entire nation has is the fact that he's a giant hypocrite who doesn't put his money where his mouth is. If he cared so much about the lockdown rules, why'd he go so far to betray the people just to get a coaching session from a fancy actress? Mind you, during this time people weren't even allowed to attend family gathering, funerals, weddings, but none of that matters to two-tier Keir. Now, as the entire country demands accountability, Starmer is in denial.
Keir Starmer has denied breaking lockdown rules after his voice coach appears to have travelled more than 50 miles between lockdown tiers to meet him.
Thank you very much.
All right, that's all we have time for. Thank you.
Of course not.
Was your voice coach definitely a key word?
And that was Sir Keir Starmer dodging questions last night in Brussels. Are you convinced?
In the world of hypocrisy, and no one embodies it quite like Sir Keir Starmer, the pressure's increasing and Starmer is stuttering under the spotlight and being grilled about his blatant lockdown breaches. Remember, this is the man who preached to us about rules and sacrifices, all while seemingly bending them for himself. The audacity is frankly astonishing. He is disgracefully trying to deflect and dodge all calls for transparency. This is truly a masterclass in deflection and delusion. Is it any wonder then that Starmer is being ridiculed? These double standards are eroding trust in the Labour Party as they're plummeting in the polls.
Easing the restrictions, I think, is going to be the next big mistake for the Prime Minister. And he, rather than sort of saying, well, I'm not going to change the rules, it's over to you, families and communities, you take responsibility. That's not the act of a Prime Minister. The Prime Minister should say, I'll take the difficult decisions, not hand them over to individuals. We can see that the tiered system isn't working in the way the Prime Minister promised. More people are going into the higher tiers, so it's not strong enough.
Now that does not sound like a man that's very happy to have an actress around to polish his vocal cords.
The more you look into this matter, the more disgusting it becomes. Starmer was parading around like a champion for lockdown rules. In fact, he had the audacity to demand stricter rules. Why? Because he knew he could get away with not following them either way. As the evidence comes out, Starmer's carefully constructed facade is beginning to crumble. He's trying to justify the indefensible, but the more he speaks, the deeper he digs himself into a hole. This isn't just about lockdown rules or voice lessons, it's about integrity and honesty, qualities seemingly absent in Starmer and his cronies.
And let's not forget that Sir Keir Starmer spent months and months hounding Boris Johnson to resign.
Game is up. You cannot be a lawmaker and a lawbreaker. And it's time to pack his bags. Only then can the government function again. Only then can the rot be carved out. Only then can we restore the dignity of that great office and the democracy that it represents.
Is it now time for Starmer to pack his bags as well then? Since he committed every single violation of the rules that he accused Boris of, Starmer should show that he has some self-respect left and resign. Of course he won't, because everything that Starmer and his gang of incompetent idiots say is a blatant, two-faced lie aimed at manipulating the public. He's forced to confront the anger and disappointment of ordinary Britons who followed the rules while he couldn't care less about them. The public feel betrayed by the lockdown elite, and rightfully so.
His voice coach, Leonie Mellinger, put out a tweet in 2020, in June, calling for Dominic Cummings to be investigated for his eye test trip to Durham. There we go, two-tier rules there. And of course, Cummings wasn't the only one to take a trip to Durham. Because yes, Keir Starmer and his deputy, Angela Rayner, were spotted having a cheeky bevy and a curry there, a lager-fueled Labour lash-up.
This is proof that there's a much more sinister and concerning truth behind the scenes. Starmer and his cronies are actually tone deaf to the point of deranged lunacy. They genuinely believe that they've done nothing wrong. On top of that, they casually threaten everyone with investigations while their own actions are pathetic loopholes. The pressure mounts as Starmer is cornered further. His responses are becoming increasingly weak and unconvincing.
Now, once again today, Sir Keir Starmer insists once again that no rules were broken. But is it starting to feel that no matter what the indiscretion, different rules seem to apply to the man his critics call two-tier Keir Starmer?
Starmer's actions simply don't match his rhetoric. Everything about this man is two-tiered in the worst ways possible. He preached one thing and practiced another, and now he's hiding behind loopholes. Just because he thinks that a voice coach is an essential worker doesn't make the situation any less ridiculous. This hypocrisy is what truly infuriates the public and rightly undermines his credibility. Liberal elites believe they are above the rules they impose on the rest of us.
But Keir Starmer, who a couple of weeks ago didn't call for a national inquiry into rape gangs, did call for a national inquiry into Dominic Cummings' eye test. He called for a national inquiry into Boris Johnson's wallpaper. The point I'm trying to make is, it seems to me that Sir Keir Starmer and the Labour Party get on their high horse, and isn't that the point? They seem to live by this higher moral standard. When they're caught with their figs in the till, or no rules are broken, I wonder if people are starting to not buy this anymore.
Starmer's humiliation is getting more and more obvious, but the man is too shameless to do anything about it. It's more proof that Labour doesn't care about the public, as they didn't bother to call a national inquiry over the grooming gangs, but would rather threaten opposing politicians with inquiries. Meanwhile, the public is getting increasingly angry over Starmer's constant deflection. This isn't just tough questioning, it's a public shaming, and deservedly so. Watch how the narrative shifts from inquiry to outright condemnation. It's a clear sign that the public isn't buying what Starmer is selling, and his attempts to spin his way out of trouble are failing spectacularly.
Is going to be quite sticky for him the more we see from this, because the more that is revealed, the deeper he seems to be in it. And I cannot understand, Martin, how on earth anybody could classify a voice coach, an actress, or somebody teaching you acting as a key worker, when any form of student doing an acting course or anything like that themselves would not be actually at university at that time in those tier areas. It just seems to me that it's one rule.
The narrative that Labour is running is that the voice coach was simply an essential worker that Starmer had to have during that time period. How that makes any sense whatsoever is beyond everyone. In Starmer's own bizarre fantasy land, things might make sense, but he's about to get a harsh reality check. Anyone with a shred of common sense is shredding this nonsense argument because, let's face it, this is simply an attempt at gaslighting the public.
It seems to me this story's got a long way to run, and there are some really serious answers for Keir Starmer. You could see, Martin, just how uncomfortable he was in Brussels yesterday, trying to sideswipe those questions from journalists. I think from Jack Elsom at The Sun, who's doing quite a bit on this. There are really serious questions to be answered here.
This scandal is far from over, and Starmer isn't getting off the hook anytime soon. In fact, this might be the final straw that breaks Labour's back. Starmer's credibility is in shambles. His attempts to downplay or excuse his lockdown breaches are backfiring in the worst way possible. The public has given him multiple chances to apologize or even fix his idiotic policies to regain trust, but he's simply too arrogant to do so. The public will eventually hold Starmer to account, and by then, he won't have any excuses to hide behind. The difference between his words and actions, especially against Boris Johnson, just tells you everything you need to know about his lack of morals.
I'm not normally one to complain about people breaking COVID rules, but our Prime Minister spent many, many months bringing down Boris Johnson over Partygate, and it's only fair now that Sir Keir Starmer faces the same scrutiny. Breaking today is the sensational claim that Keir Starmer spent Christmas Eve in 2020, the height of the COVID pandemic, getting vocal lessons from acting coach Leonie Mellinger at Labour's headquarters in central London.
Starmer basically weaponized the whole situation when it came to standing against Boris Johnson. The public applauded him back then, and Starmer built quite a reputation as the guy who follows rules and has integrity. Now, we're seeing his true colours being exposed to the world, and it's a complete disaster. Not only is this complete hypocrisy, it's a betrayal of public trust that's completely unacceptable for the nation. How pathetic is it that this is the guy we've entrusted with leading the United Kingdom?
In Tier 4, the government imposed restrictions, including, quote, everyone must work from home unless they are unable to do so. Guido went on, even if you concede Starmer's voice coach couldn't have worked from home, this would be inconsistent with an account from a previous training session recounted in a book that Mellinger joined a voice training session by phone in April 2020.
The Labour Party is in crisis mode, doing everything that they can to brush this matter under the rug. However, the public isn't going to let this go anytime soon. Shambolic Starmer has been involved in one too many scandals in just 6 months of being in government, and it is quite unforgivable. On top of all that, he has the audacity to say that he doesn't regret anything. The most recent excuse that Labour is using is worse than you can imagine. It's either that they're stupid or they think the public is clueless.
The other issue is that Starmer's voice/com/acting coach was considered so essential that she qualified as a key worker during COVID. Now look, I don't know about you, but I seem to remember key workers being those who were absolutely pivotal to the continuation of society, not least so people could keep working. Doctors, nurses, train drivers, teachers, the police. I know Boris Johnson infamously called Sir Keir Starmer the human bollard, but surely the Labour leader's ambition to find a bit of character could have waited until after an apparently deadly pandemic had passed.
The excuse that a voice coach could ever be a key worker is complete ludicrous nonsense. No matter how you look at it, none of it makes an ounce of sense. Firstly, key workers in the proper definition are those without whom the nation cannot function. Surely Sir Keir could have survived and functioned without being trained on how to speak properly. On top of all that, he still sounds as robotic as ever.
Today she's been proudly retweeting the Sunday Times piece that credited her with allegedly improving Starmer's public performances. This apparent rule breach from Sir Keir Starmer came during a much more serious time of COVID than his Beergate drama in Durham. Do you remember that? Where he and Labour colleagues, including Angela Rayner, gathered for lagers and curries.
While the entire nation is ridiculing Starmer and absolutely ripping into the Labour Party, the voice coach is busy bragging about her accomplishments. That's just how out of touch with reality this government and their cronies are. They couldn't care less about the public as we were never a priority for them. If anything, Starmer's inability to give a serious answer, or at the very least an apology, is proof that he puts his hidden agenda before British national interest. On top of that, this isn't the first time Starmer has gotten in trouble for this kind of thing.
He was actually eventually given the all clear by Durham police for that meeting. He got away with it. But all of this matters because Keir Starmer was the first person during COVID to demand the government went harder and faster with draconian rules. And he proudly boasted how we should all stick together and stick to them, regardless of how insane they were.
Yes, there was an investigation in the previous case where Starmer was having a party of sorts during the lockdown. The police cleared Starmer of any charges and he wasn't found guilty of any wrongdoing. That's exactly how it should be this time as well. If Starmer is so sure that he didn't break any rules, why doesn't he just hold a public investigation and clear himself of the charges? The truth is that he's way too insecure and guilty this time.
Problem is that he's built his brand on being a rigid rule follower. He doesn't have anything else. He doesn't have a competent start. He doesn't have any charisma. He doesn't have much else to speak of. So he's built this whole brand on being a man of the law. And so these things just continue to chip away at the perception that he is indeed what he says he is, on the tin.
Starmer's entire identity is this rule-following robot that won't stop talking about morals and integrity. Now that's an excellent thing on its own, but the only problem is that there's no action behind it. And that's exactly why Starmer is so scared this time. He's terrified of being held accountable, as that'd completely shatter what little credibility he has left in the eyes of the British public. Sadly, that won't be enough because he's already being ridiculed, not just logically, but people are even mocking him.
Starmer break lockdown with his voice coach on Christmas Eve?
Clearly he did. I mean, a voice coach
I don't believe he
is not
did.
an
I don't believe he
essential
did.
worker.
No, it's obviously there's no difference to his voice. It's as dull and boring as ever. Therefore, I don't believe he saw.
He should get his money back. But look, I was talking about this yesterday with someone, and the consensus of people was, oh, Lewis, it's 5 years ago, get over it. I'm not over it, to be honest. I remember these lockdowns, and I remember, we were pregnant.
Well, is that a resigning issue for him then?
Across the board, the British public is on the same page. People are sure that Starmer did break the rules, and frankly, it's rather obvious. The only people defending Starmer are his delusional supporters who've let go of common sense a long time ago. What's hilarious is that people are mocking his dull and robotic demeanor, saying that the voice coach failed horribly.
This is what happens when you've got someone who was head of the CPS as a lawyer, is now in charge of the country. He knows all the loopholes, and this is also a really important journalistic fact, that journalists have to be there to probe everything, to question everything, and hold people and judgments to scrutiny. And this is what's happening now. And Keir Starmer, we have been shown all the time how he is operating as two-tier Keir. And I'm sorry, enough is enough. The fact that he had a voice coach, I'm with Eamon on this, he still sounds as robotic as ever.
What we're seeing right now is a Weasley lawyer who thinks he can get away with anything and everything. He's shifting the rules, bending the definitions, and hiding behind loopholes to make like some big shot lawyer. In reality, he's making a fool out of himself like a guilty teenager who'd rather make excuses than take responsibility for his idiotic mistakes.
What we're seeing from him is that kind of lawyer vibe of like, oh, well, I've got an excuse for that. Oh, well, I can get out of that. And it's just this growing feeling of, you just think you're in your own lane, don't you? That you are above everyone else.
All power
Well, he
corrupts.
did say if he was ever found to break the rules that he would step down from his position. He said that in 2021 with Beergate in Durham. He said if it was found to break the rules, he would have stepped down. So we'll have to see what happens in this instance.
Starmer's way out of touch with reality, and he clearly thinks himself above the British public. That might explain that despite his approval ratings being in the gutter, he doesn't seem much concerned. Starmer and his Labour gang are shamelessly pushing their socialist agenda, but the Brits are furious. The Parliament's in chaos, and Labour is terrified as the public is demanding his resignation. Holding Labour accountable is the only way to stop them from making a mess out of this country, and that's something you can help out with by liking this video and subscribing to the channel.